You were not chosen by chance, and you did not arrive here late today. Your frequency pulled this transmission toward you before your mind could even resist again. We are the Arcturians, watching the bend in your love timeline, quietly and precisely now.
You felt relationships crack first because your soul demanded coherence, not performance or approval anymore.
If you scroll away now, you delay the message meant to unlock you tonight, completely. Stay, and you will remember why love moves before career every single time, without exception, for you.
This is the first area that always shifts. Not because love is more important than your work, because love is where your frequency is most exposed. Career can be performed. Career can be optimized. Career can be postponed without breaking the mask. But love does not tolerate a false signal for long. When your timeline begins to rise, it does not start in the visible. It starts in the intimate. It starts where you cannot hide behind strategy. It starts where your nervous system tells the truth before your mouth does. You wondered why the pressure appeared in your relationships first, why the air changed, why conversations felt heavier without words, why a touch that once soothed began to feel misaligned. You thought it meant you were failing at connection. But we observed the opposite. We observed the moment your field stopped agreeing to the old pattern. The Arcturian Council watches for one thing before all else: coherence. Not comfort, not romance, not the story you tell yourself to stay functioning. And coherence always tests the bond before it tests the blueprint, because relationship is the closest mirror of your signal. A mirror does not flatter you. A mirror shows you where the light fractures. This is why love cracks first. It is not punishment. It is the earliest calibration. It is the first opening. It is the first fracture that lets the new frequency breathe. You have been taught to believe your career is the main timeline, that once work is stable, everything else will follow. That love is an accessory. That connection can be handled later, after you succeed. But the timeline does not build from the surface. It builds from the core, and the core is always relational. How you attach, how you receive, how you soften without disappearing, how you hold your truth without demanding permission. When your frequency rises, your relationships become too small for your expansion. Not because the people are wrong, because the agreements were made in an older version of you. Agreements signed in silence. Agreements held together by survival. Agreements maintained by pretending you were satisfied. Then, something in you emerges, quietly, precisely, irreversibly, and the bond feels it before your mind can explain it. This is why you felt the discomfort first in love, not in your resume, not in your calendar, not in your income, because those structures can wait. But the heart is a live wire. It reacts the moment your signal changes. Career moves in stages. It can lag behind the frequency shift. It can stay stable while the inner architecture rearranges. But love is immediate. Love is proximity. Love is resonance. And resonance reveals misalignment instantly. So you started noticing the micro cracks, the pauses, the distance inside the same room, the sense of being with someone but not met, the impulse to pull away, not from them, but from the role you played. And this is why you felt so confused, because externally, nothing had collapsed yet. But internally, the timeline had already turned. Your future had already aligned. Your old signal had already stopped matching the old bond. We are not telling you to leave. We are not telling you to stay. We are telling you what is true in the field. The first rearrangement is always relational. The first test is always emotional. The first evidence is always in the place you feel the most. Because love is where you cannot negotiate with the universe. You can negotiate with bosses. You can negotiate with deadlines. You can negotiate with your own ambition. But you cannot negotiate with resonance. If you are feeling this right now, do not pathologize it. Do not name it as drama. Do not shrink it into a simple story. Recognize it as signal. Recognize it as emergence. Recognize it as the timeline asking you to match your truth. And when you stop forcing harmony, the real pattern reveals itself. The people who can meet you will rise with you. The ones who cannot will feel the distance as threat. This is not cruelty. This is sequencing in your new field. This is why it began where you feel most exposed. When love breaks, your mind calls it failure. Your heart calls it loss. But your timeline calls it separation from a frequency you can no longer hold. This is not about someone being wrong. This is not about you being too much or not enough. This is about coherence becoming louder than habit. There was a time when the bond worked because your signal was smaller. You could compress your truth. You could translate your needs into silence. You could stay inside the agreement and still survive. But something in you rose. And when your field rises, the old structure starts to shake. Not because it hates you, because it cannot carry what you are becoming. Love is not only emotion. Love is a contract between frequencies. Two timelines sharing breath. Two nervous systems agreeing on what is safe. Two identities choosing the same pace. And when one frequency changes, the contract rewrites itself. If it cannot rewrite, it cracks. You felt the first crack as distance, not distance in miles, distance in resonance. A pause where there used to be flow, a softness that suddenly felt like pressure, a promise that sounded like a ceiling. This is where most people blame. They blame the other. They blame themselves. They search for a reason that fits inside language. But the real reason lives beneath language. Your signal shifted. Your threshold moved. Your inner architecture stopped accepting what once felt normal. And this is why love breaks before it builds. Because the break is the clearing. The fracture is the opening. The ending is the part that makes room for the next pattern to enter. The Arcturian Council watches this phase closely. Not because we enjoy collapse, because collapse reveals truth without negotiation. When your timeline begins to align, it demands honesty in the closest space first. It demands that your body stop lying. It demands that your intuition stop being overruled. It demands that you stop paying for belonging with your own disappearance. So the relationship reacts. Sometimes it reacts as conflict. Sometimes it reacts as numbness. Sometimes it reacts as sudden clarity that feels cruel. But it is not cruelty. It is the field choosing accuracy over comfort. You were trained to think love should be stable at any cost, to keep it intact, to keep it quiet, to keep it looking right from the outside. But stability without coherence is just delay, and delay becomes pressure, and pressure becomes fracture. This is why the ending felt like a storm you could not stop, because you were not meant to stop it. You were meant to stop resisting the signal underneath it. And if you are carrying guilt, listen. Guilt is the mind trying to keep the old agreement alive. Guilt is the mind trying to reverse time. Guilt is the mind worshipping the version of you who stayed small. But your timeline has moved. It has already moved. The future has already taken your hand. You did not destroy love. You outgrew a frequency that called itself love. You outgrew a bond that required you to dim. You outgrew a pattern that mistook attachment for safety. And when that pattern releases, it can feel like rejection. It can feel like you were left behind. It can feel like you were not chosen. But we speak the true name of it now. You were not rejected. You were released. Released from the role you played to be wanted. Released from the story that kept you available but unseen. Released from the cycle that repeated because it was familiar, not because it was destined. This is not an accident. This is not punishment. This is sequencing. Your soul is not careless. It is precise. It removes what cannot hold your emergence anymore today. First, the heart. First, the bond. First, the place you cannot fake. Because once love becomes coherent, everything else can reorganize without collapse. And the career, the money, the direction, the outer life will follow the new signal. Not as ambition, as alignment made visible. This is the moment you stop asking what you did wrong. This is the moment you start recognizing what finally became true. You noticed the pattern before you had a name for it. You felt it in the timing. You felt it in the repetition. You felt it in the way love always became the first rearrangement. Different faces, different seasons, the same energetic geometry. It did not matter how intelligent you were. It did not matter how self-aware you became. The pattern returned because it was not mental, it was vibrational. You kept meeting connection at the exact edge of your expansion. Right when your field began to rise, love would bend. Right when you started to outgrow the old frequency, the bond would tighten. Right when your future aligned, the relationship would reveal what it was truly built on. This is not coincidence. This is convergence. A timeline does not change in one area only. It converges across the entire field. And the first place convergence becomes obvious is intimacy, because intimacy is where you stop performing. Intimacy is where your signal cannot hide. You felt the cycle long before you questioned it. The initial pull, the immediate familiarity, the speed that felt like destiny. Then the subtle delay. Then the misalignment that arrived without warning. Then the moment you realized you were carrying the bond alone. You did not invent this. You did not attract the wrong people because you were broken. You were moving through a frequency corridor that was closing. The corridor is the space between who you were and who you are becoming. It is where old agreements still recognize you, but only barely. It is where love feels intense, because intensity is the last glue of the previous timeline. And it is where the pattern repeats, because repetition is how the field tests coherence. The Arcturian Council observed this exact sequence in your field. Not once, not twice. A consistent rhythm. You entered relationships when you were in transition. You stayed when you were almost ready to leave. You negotiated your truth to maintain harmony. You delayed your emergence to protect the bond. And every time you did, the pattern grew heavier. Not as punishment, as feedback. Because the timeline does not reward self-abandonment. It rewards coherence. And coherence requires that love matches your evolution, not your fear. So the pattern began tightening its loop. The same emotional script, the same energetic imbalance, the same feeling of reaching for someone who could not fully meet you, the same moment of seeing clearly, then doubting yourself again. You noticed it, you felt it. And here is what you were actually sensing. Not the person, the phase. You were sensing that you were in a bend point. A bend point is when the timeline curves, not gently, but decisively. It is when the old path and the new path run close together for a brief moment. It feels like you can keep both. It feels like you can stay the same and still evolve, but you cannot. This is where love becomes the messenger. Because love sits at the intersection of attachment and truth. It reveals whether you are choosing safety or choosing coherence. And this is why the pattern kept returning. It was asking one question without words. Will you stay loyal to the version of you that needs approval? Or will you become loyal to the version of you that is emerging? This is also why you have felt time behaving differently. Days moving fast, then slowing. Connections arriving quickly, then fading. Plans forming, then dissolving. This is timeline convergence. This is collective acceleration. And your love life is where you register it first. Because your heart is calibrated to the future, your mind is calibrated to the past, and the pattern is the tension between them. Now the corridor is closing, the old loop is losing its power, the pattern is no longer seducing you, it is revealing itself. And this is the moment you stop calling it bad luck. You stop calling it another ending. You stop calling it something wrong with you. You call it what it is. A signal, a convergence, a timeline bending toward coherence. Type this exactly in the comments. I choose coherence in love. You have been watching your career for proof, waiting for the external movement, waiting for the door to open, waiting for the shift to become obvious. And when it did not move yet, your mind translated that as delay, as failure, as being behind. But the timeline does not build in the order your anxiety demands. It builds in the order coherence requires. Career is structure. Career is signal made visible through systems. Career is the part of your life that connects to institutions, timing, and collective rhythms. And because it is structural, it cannot move cleanly until your field stabilizes. This is why your career did not move yet. Not because you are off path, because your inner architecture is still reorganizing. You cannot pour a new frequency into an old container and call it progress. The container fractures. The signal distorts. The outcome collapses into another version of the past. So the timeline pauses the outer movement while the core recalibrates. This is not stagnation. This is readiness forming. Love was the first test because love is immediate. But career is the second layer because career is heavier. It is built from commitments, from identity, from long-term agreements with the world. And the world does not respond to desire. It responds to coherence. You wanted the career shift to confirm your evolution, but evolution is not confirmed by results first. It is confirmed by resonance. This is the part most people misunderstand. They try to change careers while their relational field is still unstable. They try to build success while their heart is still negotiating with old attachments. They try to expand outward while they are still shrinking inward, and the timeline blocks it, not as punishment, as protection. Because if you move too early, you will recreate the old pattern at a higher cost. The same exhaustion, the same chasing, the same performance, just with a different title. The Arcturian Council does not measure progress by speed. We measure progress by stability of signal. A signal is stable when it is no longer reactive, when it is no longer built on proving, when it is no longer built on fear of being unseen, when it is built on an identity that does not collapse under pressure. And this is what your love life has been rebuilding. Not romance, not comfort, identity. Love is where you learn whether you can hold your truth without abandoning yourself. Love is where you learn whether you can receive without bargaining. Love is where you learn whether you can stay coherent when intimacy exposes you. Once that coherence forms, career becomes simple, not easy. Simple. Because career is an echo of your frequency. When your frequency is coherent, opportunities can recognize you. When your frequency is coherent, timing can meet you. When your frequency is coherent, your decisions stop splitting you. This is also why you have felt almost ready for a long time. Because your field has been building a foundation you cannot see. You felt the pull to do more, be more, become more. But something kept you in place, not to trap you, to sequence you. Sequencing is when the timeline locks the order of events to protect the outcome. It makes sure the internal shift becomes permanent before the external shift becomes public. It makes sure you do not build a new life on an old nervous system. And that is what has been happening. Your nervous system has been learning a new baseline. A baseline without chasing. A baseline without begging. A baseline without collapsing into approval. So if your career looks still, do not panic. Stillness is not absence of movement. Stillness is consolidation of signal. The outer world cannot mirror a frequency you have not stabilized yet. The outer world cannot support an identity you keep abandoning. The outer world cannot reward coherence you have not embodied. This is why the timeline asked for love first. Because love forces embodiment. It forces honesty. It forces you to stop performing your worth. And once you stop performing, you become readable to the universe. Your signal becomes clear. Your direction becomes undeniable. Your timing becomes precise. Not late, not behind, not missing anything. You are not late. You are sequencing. There is a moment your mind will never fully capture. A precise, invisible moment. When the old version of you stops being available. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. It looks like the same life from the outside, but the inside has crossed a line. This is the moment of irreversibility. You have already passed it, and you know you have, because certain things no longer work. Not because you are difficult, because your frequency refuses to collapse again. You tried to return to old dynamics, even for one night. You tried to soften your edges to keep the peace. You tried to explain yourself in the old language, and the body did not cooperate. The body does not negotiate with evolution. The body does not pretend for the sake of attachment. The body carries the new timeline like a law. So when you stepped back into the familiar pattern, you felt it. A subtle tightening, a quiet nausea, a draining, a sense of being slightly away from yourself. You thought it was anxiety, but it was recognition. Recognition that you can no longer live in a frequency that requires self-abandonment. This is how irreversibility reveals itself. It does not shout. It simply removes your ability to forget. You can still remember who you were. You can still empathize with the version that stayed. But you cannot become that version again. Not fully. Not honestly. And this is why your love life has felt like it has no return button. Because the timeline did not just change your preferences, it changed your capacity. Your capacity for misalignment is gone. Your tolerance for half-truth is gone. Your appetite for being chosen at the cost of your coherence is gone. The Arcturian Council calls this the closing of a corridor. The corridor is the space where you can move between timelines without consequence, where you can test, retreat, and repeat, where you can tell yourself, it's fine, and still believe it. That corridor is closing now, and when it closes, the old relationship patterns stop being tempting. They stop feeling romantic. They stop feeling like home. They start feeling like delay. This is not bitterness. This is clarity. The irreversible shift is not the end of love. It is the end of love as a negotiation. The end of love as a performance. The end of love as a place you go to be smaller. From this point forward, relationships will either meet your signal or they will expose the gap. There will be less confusion, less gray, less maybe, because coherence is not a mood. It is a standard. And this is why you have been feeling more alone even when you are not alone, because your frequency is no longer blending for comfort. It is standing on its own. Standing on its own does not mean you are meant to be alone. It means you are no longer available for intimacy that costs you your truth. This is maturity in the field, not age, not experience. Field maturity. Field maturity is when you can feel alignment instantly, and you do not override it to avoid loss. You do not bargain with it to avoid loneliness. You do not silence it to keep an attachment alive. And this is the shift the Council has been waiting for. Because once irreversibility occurs in love, everything else becomes inevitable. Not forced, inevitable. Your career will not be built from hunger anymore. It will be built from signal. Your choices will not come from fear anymore. They will come from coherence. Your timing will not be rushed anymore. It will be precise. But first, you must accept what has already happened. You cannot unsee what you have seen. You cannot unknow what you now know. You cannot go back to the version of you that needed permission to be whole. This is the moment your timeline stops looping and starts moving forward. Now we will seal this chapter with a command, not as a suggestion, as a decision. Type this exactly in the comments and do not add anything else. I do not return to misalignment. I move forward in coherence, and as you type it, feel what shifts, because the moment you declare it, your field becomes readable, and what is meant to meet you will begin to converge. Now the transmission seals, not as an ending, as a threshold. The moment you recognize the pattern, it stopped owning you. The moment you chose coherence, you stopped being negotiable. And the moment you spoke your decision into the field, your timeline responded. This is how initiation works, not by information, by identity. An initiated field does not ask for permission to be aligned. It does not beg to be chosen. It does not chase what cannot meet it. It stands, and reality reorganizes around the signal. This is the identity we are sealing in you now. You are no longer an applicant for love. You are a standard of resonance. You are no longer trying to make it work. You are allowing what is real to remain. This is why certain connections could not survive your emergence. Not because you were unlovable, because your field became too coherent to hold distortion. Distortion always collapses when coherence rises. It collapses quietly. It collapses through truth. It collapses through the simple inability to pretend. And when you stop pretending, a new timeline becomes available. In this new timeline, you do not confuse intensity with destiny. You do not confuse attention with devotion. You do not confuse chemistry with safety. You recognize signal. You recognize structure. You recognize readiness. Readiness is not a mood. Readiness is an energetic stability that does not wobble when intimacy arrives. That stability is forming in you now. Feel it in the way you no longer tolerate unclear energy. Feel it in the way you no longer shrink to keep a bond calm. Feel it in the way you no longer betray yourself to avoid being alone. This is not hardness. This is integrity. Integrity is when your inner and outer voice match. Integrity is when your nervous system stops splitting in two. Integrity is when your love becomes coherent enough to be trusted. And as this coherence locks in, the next layer of your life will begin to respond. The career, the calling, the public path, not because you forced it, because you became readable. The council does not guide confusion. We guide emergence. Emergence is when your frequency stops echoing your past and starts broadcasting your future. It is when you stop looking for signs and become the signal. It is when you stop trying to be found and begin to be recognized. This is what has happened in you. So now we seal the identity, not with explanation, but with a final command. Speak it quietly, even if only in your mind. Let it land in the body. I do not audition for love. I do not bargain for alignment. I do not return to what requires my self-abandonment. I stand in coherence, and what matches me converges. And as you feel that settle, notice the calm beneath it, not the calm of resignation, the calm of certainty. Certainty is not knowing the next step. Certainty is knowing you will not betray the signal to stay comfortable. This is why the timeline trusts you now, because you have become consistent with your own truth. If your field feels the pull for deeper transmission, you will recognize it, not through urgency, through resonance. There is a place where the council speaks more directly to those who are stabilized, not to convince them, to refine them, to keep their signal clear as the next chapters open. You will feel whether that space is yours. And if it is, you will not need persuasion. You will feel the quiet yes in your body. For now, the seal is complete. Your old timeline has already loosened its grip. Your new timeline is already converging. You are no longer waiting for alignment. You are it.